Hello and welcome to the podcast on negotiation. And in our today's episode, we're going to talk about the art and science of convincing with Adele and Chip. Adele,
Yes.
Chip, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Remy.
Guys, imagine this tag team has a unique set of competencies. Adele is a communication expert, and Chip is a former FBI agent. And that poses immediately an avalanche of questions. First of which is, how did you guys get together?
Chip?
Well, it started when we met at a entrepreneurial dinner in Washington, D.C. And it was one of those things, Remy, where you go around the room after a period of time and you introduce yourself, you give a short bio, right, about a minute. And when I heard Adele introduce herself, and she has done these. She has a PR and crisis communications firm, and she had worked for presidents. She had spoken at the UN twice, and she had been on Madison Avenue. She had this rich, diverse background. I thought, wow, that could be really cool. And if I wonder if our skill set would have some complementary kind of tie-ins. And so we started talking. And that's how it all began. Yeah.
So sometimes the best, most exciting journeys start with food, actually,
Yeah.
right?
Of course, yeah.
And Adele, what did you think when you saw this former FBI dude approaching you with his ideas? Were you convinced immediately?
For the first few conversations, I was like, "Are you analyzing me? Are you reading me? Like this is like making me uncomfortable. Like, what do you think?" But yeah, no. We immediately thought we got to do this. This is such an interesting combination of skills and perspectives, and we just knew that there was no one else out there that had our skill set, or especially not combined. And so we just thought, wow, this could be a powerhouse offering.
That sounds amazing. Yes. So you guys are the convincing company, right?
Yep.
And together you co-authored a book called Convince Me.
Yep.
Convince me. Yeah.
All right. And what inspired you guys to write this book?
Oh yeah. Let me give you a backstory on this, Remy. Right. Again, see, remember, I come from the government background, right? I was a special hostage negotiator for the FBI for 22 years. And when I retired, decided, I want to do something. I'd like to start a business and meeting
back.
and then meeting Adele. And like I said, we started talking, and this was about, a little over 5 years ago. And so we're talking, and Adele's asking me questions about what I learned at Quantico and how I used it in the field and what kind of hostage and crisis situations did I face and what did I do. And then after a period of time, she says, "You know what? We got enough." I said, "Enough what?" She goes, we have enough now. I know pretty much what the offer is. I know that this has a great business need potential. I said, "Okay, well," and she said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put on a masterclass." I said, "Okay." She said, "We're going to do it in 3 months." Okay. And my mind's starting to, explode. I have all these things. Wait, we got to and she says, "We're going to have it in New York City." I said, "Oh, whoa, no, we can't." And, I'm thinking, we got a million questions. We have to tie this down. Now, this is Adele, and Adele moves at the speed of light. So if she has an idea, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this, Remy, and your viewers as well, when she has an idea, she brings it to market immediately. She wants to test it. She wants to see what resonates, what doesn't. She wants to iterate on the spot. So and to the day, Remy, we have the masterclass, New York City. It sells out because, again, Adele's a marketer, a PR person, so she knows how to do that too. And we duplicate it again in DC. Now,
There's something that happens right then and there.
Right after that masterclass, like a day or so, the news comes over the radio. We were at another conference, and it was, they've just declared a pandemic. We're like, okay, all right. So this is, again, we know a lot of people caught in this as well. So Adele says here's what we're going to do in this downtime. We're going to write a book. Again, Adele, speed of light, going. And she'd already, figured out in her mind how, what the outline was going to look like. And she's a writer as well, which is great for me since I'm, not so good with the words.
Yes, you
So,
are. Oh, stop. Stop. It's terrible.
so anyway, so that's what it was. And boom, there's a book put out by McGraw-Hill in 24. So
it's tough, right? I mean, I just think the pandemic offered that downtime really, because there weren't a lot of people who were, hiring consultants for crisis communications because the whole world had a crisis. So it wasn't exactly an ideal time to sell what we were selling. And funny enough, Remy, you'll laugh at this. Right before the pandemic struck, I did a full crisis communication plan for the Infectious Disease Society of America. and a pandemic was one of our way out crazy crisis scenarios that probably isn't going to happen. But we wrote the whole plan for them. So they were like right at the forefront of answering all the questions. They were they were ready and prepared. Unfortunately, though, like for us, we were like, that's a great campaign. That's going well.
I hate to come up with conspiracy theories right now, but this cannot be a coincidence, huh?
Yeah.
All right. So we have a communication expert, and we have a former FBI hostage negotiator. Why did you guys decide? What do you guys bring to the table? The secret of effective cooperations or collaborations is complementary skill sets, or our complementary skill sets. Yeah. What does Adele have that you don't? And Adele, what does Chip have and you don't?
Yeah. So it became very clear to me that one of the things that Adele said that she realized that she needed after she started talking to me was the emotional component of getting leaders to follow what you need them to do. So Adele is, again, she's very quick. She has a very astute business mind, and she has a natural kind of cadence for crisis work. So she knows within 5 minutes of arriving on a scene what needs to happen, how to get to solve. Pretty much 5 to 10 minutes, she can tell you. But the trick is getting the key players to do the things that she needs them to do. So Remy, with CEOs and so forth, and anybody that is in the C-suite, stakeholders, they're very reluctant to do some difficult steps, but that Adele knows are critical. So unless they follow what she says to do, then it's going to go sideways very quickly. And Adele knows there's a clock that's ticking, and she has to get some steps in. So that's one of the things that I found when she was calling on me to work in these situations, was she wanted me to work with the leaders and get their mindset situated to what needed to happen. And so that was a perfect fit for me because, as you know, in hostage crisis negotiations, right, it's really getting that person, convincing that person to value what you value, what you need them to do, the steps, the little things that have to happen in order to move them from where they are right now, which is the primitive brain or the crisis moment, back to the rational, analytical thought process. So,
yeah.
Is he right, Adele?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things is, prior to meeting Chip, I had this crisis communication agency, and I was successful in getting CEOs to do what it is I needed them to do, because they were in a jam and they had to listen. But Chip made it pleasant, right? Like, it's like, I think that's the difference, right? Like, I mean, I think I was like, you have to do these 5 things and you have to do them now, or you're going to be in some big trouble. And I think folks really respected that. But then when you bring in de-escalation skills, when you bring in the ability to assess a situation like Chip can, his calming ability is just unprecedented. I mean, I think I don't have those skills, right? I'm not
She
I'm
does.
not as calm as but I also bring the urgency. So we have a really nice balance in that, Chip can be calm and, and I'm like, okay, you got to do these 5 things. Then Chip will be like, well, how do you feel about doing these 5 things? I'm like, let's not focus on that too long. Then let's move on. But it's such an important combination, and many people who are in leadership and communications or any kind of like managerial role, they are not taught the skills that Chip really understands. Like, how do you listen to someone so they feel truly seen and heard and understood, so that they're actually willing to do what it is you need them to do. And I think so many of us are probably really good at our craft. We're really good at whatever our specialty is. But when you're in a crisis, sometimes that specialty can get in the way of the emotions required for getting someone to do what it is you need
Right.
them to do. And you must be so familiar with this, Remy, this concept, and you must run into it a lot in your line of work. I can imagine.
That sounds super exciting. So, guys, now let's come back to convince me. Let's come back to the book. Yes, so we know you have complementary skill sets. You know what Adele brings to the table. We know what are the strengths of that Chip represents. And now you decided to write a book about persuasion, about convincing. Yes, what would be your quick pitch? Why should people read it? For the a quick pitch for the book, why should people read it? What's the main message behind the book? Adele, you are the communication expert. I'm sure you have this one-liner that somehow subsumes and summarizes the key benefits that readers can get after having read your book.
I think, I would say no pressure, Remy, none at all. So I would say, we examined what some of the most convincing people in the world do to be effective at influence and persuasion. And it is all in the book, really, at practical skills that you can use every single day. One of the reasons why we wrote this book was because we love books like this, books on persuasion, books that give you theories on why things work. But that's not practical. And so we just felt like theories are good, but actually, how do I use it? How do I use it in everyday business? And that's what our book brings. It offers you theories and some research, but it also says, here's how you apply it to your everyday business. And I think that's why people should go read it.
Mm-hmm. So it's this combination of theory and practice, summarized in quick and easily implementable guidelines on how to, and then convince, listen, and how to master various elements of persuasion. Did I understand it correctly?
You did. And I'll tell you what, like, it is a challenge to cull down what it is you want to write about in a book like this, because there's so much great information on it, right? This topic. And so really figuring out what the most important parts are. So we really tried to create some very practical advice.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's start with the at the beginning. Yes, in one of the first chapters, I noticed that you introduced the notion of forensic listening as an extension or further development of active listening. Yes, could you explain our listeners and viewers what it means to be a forensic listener and what they can do to become one?
Sure. So forensic listening, the idea behind this, just as you aptly described, Remy, is that it's the next step from active listening. And what we say with forensic listening is that it's the art and science of analyzing a conversation after it's happened, because we believe that words leave clues. So the idea here is that you're looking at a person in totality. And we suggest for people to take notes in a quadrant way. So there's 4 quadrants that we ask people to write down or memorize about a specific interaction with somebody. And the first one we'll talk about is the emotion. Now, what emotion is present, right, in that person that's in front of you, whether that's a colleague, supervisor, potential client, whoever that is, it's important that you're trying to connect with them. One way is to figure out what emotion is dominant here, and where does that emotion hit? Where does it spike? The other is the themes. What themes are they developing as they're talking to you? And it can't be separate from what the stated meaning is, which is often an indicator how important this theme is. So if it's repeated more than once, it's important to them. And it better be important to you, because that is going to help you fill in about who this person is. And the third quadrant is going to be the body positioning. And what we say is that we differentiate body positioning from body language. You know, we've all heard, well, if you're sitting with your arms crossed and your legs crossed, well, you might be either reticent to move and act on an idea, or you're disagreeing with that person, or you just like to sit with your arms crossed, right?
Either one.
It's one of the things. But what we say is that we are creatures of our environment and what's happening, and we are interacting with it constantly. So we're moving. We are changing our position toward the person and to our environment constantly. Pay attention to that, right? In relation to the theme. And the fourth one, Remy, is going to be about the voice. That's your pitch, tone, and cadence. So where am I going up? Where am I going down? Where am I plateauing? And if you combine those four areas, you're going to get more of a picture about what that person was actually trying to convey to you. What was important to them at that moment? What did they want you to make sure that you remembered, or that they were particularly excited about because they thought it was a smart idea? Now, we suggest that what you do with that is that you combine it with another part of our process called targeted validation. And let's say you're trying to, again, convince this person, bring them over to your position, get them perhaps used to and comfortable around you. One way of doing that is using this idea of targeted validation. For example, the person who was in front of you, let's say they were describing this idea of, hey, I'm trying to get my employees to have more buy-in, more skin in the game. And that was like the stated purpose of the meeting, is like, how do I increase that stakeholder mentality? But actually, what they wanted to talk about was your culture in your organization. And so maybe they had one or two questions about this buy-in, but really they kept coming back to, so what's it like to work there? You know, what are the challenges? What do you see as, a positive improvement in your workforce? So you're going to take that back, right? And then you're going to start in 2 weeks. If you do this, you're going to separate yourself from 90% of the people out there. 2 weeks, you go back to that person and say, we had a great talk and I really appreciate it. It meant a lot to me. And I noticed that while our meeting was really about stakeholder and buy-in, I kept hearing from you, and it just made a lot of sense, was about work culture fit. And I just want you to know, I went back to my team and I told them how important it was to have that intersection where these things combine, and how the culture, can actually improve performance. And I ran it by them. We have some great ideas as a result of that. And I just wanted to thank you. And I was like, and Adele and I were saying, when was the last time somebody came back to us and said, that time at that conference when you gave the keynote, yeah, it was amazing, right? Never happens, right? Hardly ever does it happen. But imagine the impact that would have on somebody else, that you go back and you not only heard them, but you heard something that was somewhat hidden, and it so resonated with you, you took action, and you just wanted to thank that person for that. It's huge impact driver, right?
It's the makeup of anyone who has true influence and the ability to build relationships quickly. If you think about just who are the most influential people, they listen so intently that you walk away feeling like they understand you in one conversation. That is true influence. That's true ability to persuade.
Yes. Persuasion and convincing starts with listening, right? It's the respect it's the respect that we pay to the other person, and if they feel listened to and understood, they might be more might be more more inclined to accept let's say, behavioral changes that we are interested in
Yes.
suggesting. Yes. So it sounds like forensic listening goes beyond just pure vocal signals and paraphrasing them. It moves into a more holistic perception of what the other person is trying to tell us beyond the audio waves that we are perceiving in our ears, right? And the understanding that it results in. Yes, is that correct? Would that be correct? Would you
Yes,
say?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. So now we know it starts with listening. Convincing starts with listening. Forensic listening. Yes. What comes next? What are the most important central pillars of convincing or persuasion that you share in the book?
Yeah, so I love. I'm gonna talk about two concepts because I love this one. This one's very practical and very easy. So if your listeners are paying attention, they should really get a pen and paper because we're gonna just give a really important piece of advice that anyone can use. There you go. You got your pen. Okay. What I would say is, if you want a really easy framework to think about how to understand the other person, you have to think about whether they are an emotional convincer or are they a fact-based convincer. And it's not to say that you're either or, but you have a preference, a natural preference. So a person who's more of a storyteller, who has more emotion in their stories, who's who's focused on the outcomes for everyone in the room and is really more of a emotionally driven person, their convincing style and how they want to be convinced is emotional, right? Is likely they want that back. Now, a fact-based convincer, if you go after a fact-based convincer with all emotion, they're going to be like, whoa, hold up. What proof do you have that any of this is true? And so they just have different preferences. And even just understanding that very simple framework, you can adapt your convincing style depending on who you're speaking with, right? And so this idea of flexibility in how you convince and persuade is so lost on most of us, right? We have convincing styles that we've developed, and we have some research in our book that says since the age of 6. So since the age of 6, you learn convincing styles. So if you convinced on the playground by sulking, you're likely to convince later in life by sulking, right? Like, I mean, your convincing style is not going to really change that much. But kids on the playground, they're negotiating all the time, right? They're negotiating preference. They understand supply and demand. They understand all of these like really key concepts at age 6. And so most of us really do not develop beyond what we know works, and we have known has worked our whole life. And so being able to be adaptable is just something that people are so uncomfortable with, because to take a risk like that as an adult, to try something new, it's just something we're not comfortable with, especially not at something that's very important at work, right? So we go back to the things that have worked maybe some of the time. And worked on some of the people, and we're not adapting our strategies. And what we offer are really key concepts to adapt your strategy as you get older and as you persuade different people, because it's different. What would you say you are, Remy? Are you more fact-based? Or are you more?
Oh, I'm definitely a cognitive convincer. Definitely.
Right. I figured. Yeah.
But Adele, you said two. You wanted to mention two. So one is flexibility, adaptability, and what's the other one?
The other one is this concept of something we call the convincing continuum. And it's a big concept, but I'll explain it as briefly as I can, which is every time you're convincing someone or you're persuading someone, you have to think of it as a continuum, right? You all come to the persuasion conversation, let's say, with a certain thing in mind. And really perceptive people, really convincing people, they understand what the point of agreement is. Because you don't want to start with a point that, you don't want to start with your best point first, because all you're going to do is get the other person to dig their heels in and go, no, I don't agree with that. Right. And so the whole time they're just thinking about why they don't agree with you, and they're building their argument in their head. So they're not really hearing anything you're saying. So the best, most persuasive thing you do in these kinds of situations, you start at your point of agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move people down a continuum. And to move people down this continuum, it's all based on 40 years of social science research, right? But most of us just don't know this or are not familiar with this. And you move them down, and you use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. What don't they know about the topic? What do they fear about the topic? What do they doubt about the topic? You keep moving them down, and you do this you might do this in one conversation, but likely you're going to do it over a few conversations. And then if you're doing it in one, you want to leave them with what we call the convincing cliffhanger. And the convincing cliffhanger is this amount of information, data, research, a story that gets someone to go, wow, I've never thought of it that way. I'm going to go research that. You lead them to a place, to the research that you want them to do, right? And it could be a blog, it could be a white paper, it could be a book, it could be anything, but you're guiding them to what you want them to know. And then the next time you come back to the conversation, they see you as agreeable. They see you as understanding their fears, their uncertainties, their doubts. You've left them now with some information they didn't know before that they're gaining from you. And so that next time you talk to them, how much more likely are they to be open to you convincing them that it's their idea? And that's not manipulation. It's just good persuasion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So flexibility, adaptability in terms of convincing or persuasion styles. That's number one. And then convincing continuum, as you described, Adele, which means maybe starting with more agreeable points to build rapport, strengthen the relationship first before we get them ready to for our, let's say, more conflicting points or more points of disagreement. Is that
Exactly.
the idea?
Exactly. And then you leave them with something, just like if you think about, if you've ever watched a Netflix show, and you're watching Netflix and you're watching it for a while and it goes to just the next episode and you see that thing come, usually the thing that they got you is some kind of cliffhanger, right? They want you to watch that next. You don't quite know what's going to happen on the next episode. And so really good convincers do this too, naturally.
Mm-hmm. So Chip, if you think about your amazing 22-year career at the FBI as a hostage negotiator, if you somehow reflect back upon it, extracting key takeaways that also work in business or beyond your line of duty back then, yes. If you had to summarize them in terms of persuasion, especially focusing on persuasion and convincing, what would that be?
Yeah, I think in today's world, one of the new manifestations is this need to be right, is that we have to win our arguments. We take it, everything is now, take it to the mat, 100%. We're going to fight. And I think the power lies in somebody being able to show that it's, there are many sides to an argument, to a position, and it doesn't necessarily mean that because I differ with you, doesn't mean that you're a bad person or I'm a bad person. We put so much value on these positions, and it's very difficult to extract them from that. But if we've like we've laid out here, is that if we can say to the, just come at it with an open position without all this other baggage attached to it, then, these arguments really will be less. We're going to see that, you're going to be seen, just like Adele said, as a more reasonable person. And that's the people that we gravitate to. We gravitate toward the people that aren't necessarily on the outlier, but the person that's more in the center of hearing everybody, of wanting to understand the other person. That's really the key thing, is that we often say in our presentations that you lose every argument you're in. Any argument that you go to and you think that you've won, we guarantee you've lost.
Yeah.
Because you have what have you done? You've either tried to belittle that person to show them that they have a weaker position than you, or perhaps not as intellectually strong as you. Whatever it is, you have decreased that person's value to themselves and to the world. So what should you be doing? What should be the purpose of all our interactions? Should be to improve relationships, because that's where the strength is. That's where the power comes from. And if I think about it from my position as a hostage negotiator, I never went in and said, put that gun down, come out. That was not going to ever work. So what I had to do was come to them from an understanding of, hey, what got us here today? What made you today grab a gun and put it to somebody's head? What happened in your life? So what I'm seeking to do is I'm seeking to get to understand them. I want to understand their position. I want to know what is their deepest, darkest problem that they're dealing with. And in that way, understand them and then move them toward where I want them to value, which is life, which is purpose, which is safety. So that's one of the things is to see people in these positions not as so black and white, but try to get to the center.
Mm-hmm. We know, Adele, that you need to run.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. If you don't mind, I'll torture Chip with some of my questions.
Please,
beyond.
my pleasure. Torture away. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank you, Adele.
Take care.
So Chip, let's pick up on the lessons that you've just extracted, lessons from the field that still are valid much beyond, yes, or well beyond that context. Let me remove Adele from our stream like this. Is there any practical advice that you could share with our listeners and viewers that they could start implementing immediately, right? Beyond the concepts, which all make perfect sense. So if we are to extract or to recommend things like, let's say, your description, your practical advice on forensic listening, as beyond listening towards convincing, what would that be?
Right. One of the things is to find not just like what Adele was talking about with the point of agreement, but to take it a step further with the other individual. And let's say, we're seeing so many today in families, as we're kind of again in a very bifurcated situation. Especially here in the States, there's communications problem is unending. So one of the things to do is to remember and remind the other person about the foundation of the relationship. How did it start in the first place? So if you're having difficulties with a colleague or a family member, one way to bring it back to where it all began is to talk about foundation. So let's say you have a brother-in-law it's coming to Christmas or whatever the holiday is for you. And that person represents a view that is polar opposite you. And it's never easy to have these conversations with them. So what you do is, what most of us do is that we just don't talk about those certain areas, right? But good luck, because they're coming up anyway. So,
sure.
So one thing is to do is to remember the common stories that you have. Hey, John, I remember, that time about 3 Christmases ago. Do you remember that time when it was, you and I cooked the turkey and the disaster that followed that, and you remember, how everybody didn't say anything about it, but it was like, but we knew it was horrible. So it's something that you've made together, or a memory, whatever that is, you remind that other person about that. You're taking them back to a memory of something that was foundational to the development of that relationship. Why is this important? It's important because memories are a shortcut to emotion, because that's what a memory is, right? A memory is an emotion. And we cherish those memories value those memories that have the biggest impact upon us, whether that's joy or sorrow. We bring them to us close if we connect that person to that foundational experience and we remind them. That's what we're doing. We are keying the brain to bring this back up, to pull it from the file and put it in front of them. They're like, oh yeah, I do remember that. Or you can engage in an activity that is non-competitive. And here's what I mean by that. We talked to a professor over at Wharton. His name is, he's a neuroscientist and an MD, as Dr. Michael Platt. And brilliant guy. He said, one of the things that was foundational in his research was that the brain is always interested to sync up with another. And it's fascinating in that he did a study. He put on those, I forget what they're called, Raym. You probably know, but it's brainwave like registers.
Detectors, yeah.
Right. And he had some volunteers from the audience come up while he was presenting. And he said, I want you to build like a ship together. Can you do that for me? And they had on those registers on their head. And what the audience got to see, because they had it on the screen, is that the brainwaves at first were disparate, but as they continued on in the task together, the brainwaves sunk together. There was a sinking happening. And he said it's the same thing. The brain will search out and try to get to those things, recognize those patterns, those things that bring it to that kind of point of I am connected to you. We should be seeking collaborative understanding whenever we can. So that's another powerful technique, is to use the right language, right? We, together, how can we get through this? What are the things that we need to do right now? All these things, whenever it describes to the other person, I'm here for you. I have your back. I'm going to support you. Those are very powerful, primal emotions in us, right? And they bring us comfort, because that's what we're all seeking in times of distress, right? We're seeking comfort. And when another person offers that, and to agree to share in the struggle, again, you are making huge inroads into understanding.
That makes a lot of sense. So digging up the good joint memories that trigger positive emotions and engaging in non-competitive activities that help us sync our brain waves or help our brainwaves sync together. That makes a lot of sense. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, so let me blend in the one from Freddie. I've heard Adele mention several times that Chip has a unique perspective on giving a heartfelt apology. Chip, would you mind sharing some advice on how to do one the right way? Probably the apology. My apologies for putting you in the spot. So Freddie already tried an apology. Was it
well done?
Is it a good one or not?
Absolutely, it is. Right? It made me feel better that I'm dealing with this from jump. No, that's a great question. I love this topic. It's so important. For example, in any relationship that we have, any important relationship that we have in life, we're going to come to a point where we have a disagreement. And the deeper the relationship is with the other person, the more profound and emotional that disagreement can be, right? So it takes on a kind of different animal when we are face to face with somebody that, the example I always use is couples. Whatever the significant other in your life is, you have already gone through something that has been very emotional, very painful, and very powerful. And it started out, as it always does, over a very small thing, right? It's like, you could really put that dish in the dishwasher, right? Why do you always do it? And it starts and it escalates. And it's like, now you're getting to, they're pulling in your ancestors. You're fighting, just about everything. And it's becoming intense to the point where you're no longer in your rational mind. and it's win at all costs, right? So that's what's in effect, because again, we want to win. When we are in a struggle, it is our base human nature to say, I must decimate the other person, right? I must kill. Well, that's not improving a relationship. And so one of the ways this takes training, and it takes intense training to get to this point where if you can catch yourself before you've gotten to that point, and this is where I think is the instructive for Freddie's question, is if you can catch yourself before you get there, before you've tripped over that minefield that says I'm going to go scorched earth here, and you say, wait a minute, you just said something really powerful, and I hadn't thought about it before, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Would you mind helping me understand? Because when you said, that I just take you for granted and I'm leaving dishes here, is there something else that I'm not doing that is resonating with you? And what I'm doing there is I'm using empathy, and empathy is the core kind of component to whenever we're interacting. And I know all your listeners know this, but it's so vital to be able to implement it while you're in the heat of the moment. Because if I do an apology, to Freddie's point, and I say, the other person says, listen, all I'm looking for is an apology. And what are you going to say to that? All right, I'm sorry. Okay. Not an apology, right? Or I'm sorry. Not an apology, right? It's the voice. It's the voice and the authenticity behind that. And if it's lacking, you might as well, throw in a bomb, because it has the same effect. It's worse, right? So the apology must be authentic, and it must come from the heart. How do we get there? This is the discipline part. Because if our goal is to improve the relationship of that person that's in front of us, if that person means everything to us, it's a significant other, it's a family member, it's a pivotal relationship. So what am I doing? I'm arguing with this person. I'm taking it to the mat. This is DEFCON 1. No. What I'm trying to do is understand that person, and I'm trying to let them know, one, I hear you, I see you, I want to understand you better. Not that I do understand completely. Never ever say to another person, I know what you're going through. Right? Nope, never. Because that's a falsehood, and it insults the other person. We all know that. However, this guy right here, Chip, highly trained FBI hostage negotiator. Those words have come out my mouth. I have said that. I've said the words, hey, you need to calm down. What? I'm telling another person what to do and how to feel? Never. That's so against my training, but it happens, right? These things will happen. Can we get back to that? Yes. Can we repair? Absolutely. It takes time. But the point is that we have to be authentic in that moment. When we are talking to that person, we're going to take a step back. We're going to take a breath. We're going to allow these sudden hit emotions, the cortisol, the adrenaline to get out of us as much as we can, and get back to our analytical brain and say, hey, I just got to say, I am sorry, because I wasn't hearing you. I was just upset, and I was being defensive, and that wasn't what I wanted to be. Right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Chip. Freddie, there is this saying, or a question actually, very commonly repeated in good negotiation training. What is it that you want? Do you want to be happy or right? Do you want to get a deal, or do you want to be right?
That's it.
Sometimes, and I underestimate myself the importance of the overarching goal with respect as compared to the truth. Yes, because ultimately, sometimes being right, yes, might cost us the happiness. Yes, and sometimes being right might cost us the deal. So
absolutely.
Ultimately, sometimes it is a trade-off. I hope not too often, because we all have our triggers. Yeah, we all have our triggers. Those are events. Those are claims. Those are demands that trigger emotional and negative emotional reactions. Yes, and as much as the, let's say, the recognitions of those triggers can be trained. Yes, and also moving or pushing them further away, meaning, let's say, maintaining composure for a longer time despite those triggers, they are there.
Yes.
And maybe that's a question to you, Chip, right? Because in your training, you guys were probably made aware of the triggers that for you individually cause emotional reactions. Yes. What were they for you, and how did your trainers, how did your coaches try to shift them or push them further away so that you can do your job better as a hostage negotiator?
That's a great question, Remy, and I haven't been asked that, but it immediately evoked an emotional memory for me. So I still remember when I was going through Quantico for hostage negotiations, and it's a very intense experience, as you can imagine. And the idea is that just like with regular agent training in Quantico, it's very similar to hostage negotiating training in this, is that they turn up the stress on you, a little bit every minute of every day, right? That's the idea, to see how you'll function, to see where are your weak spots, because you can come in, be fresh, ready to go day one and be flawless. But how long can you do that? And how long will it take for me to poke holes in that? And that's what they do. And I remember this one time in my specific role play, because that's what part of the experience is that there's a full day of classes followed by an evening of hostage or crisis scenario where they hire role players, and like what we do in our company as well, in the convincing company, for our immersive experience. We hire role players to play the part of an angry customer, an angry partner, or actually a hostage taker. So we have these different scenarios depending upon what their client is looking for. But for this purpose, it was Quantico, and it was a hostage taker, and it was somebody that the role player was, they had hostages on an airplane. And in Quantico, so many things are possible, right? So I was actually in a partial airplane hangar where they had a fuselage of an airplane, and I was on a telephone with the hostage taker who had hostages. So, and it was my turn to be the negotiator. We all took turns and various roles of a hostage team. So this is it, Remy. So I'm talking to this guy and I'm doing my best, right? I'm doing it effectively. I'm using my voice. I'm being very calm. I'm being sincere. I'm being authentic, and I'm asking him questions. I'm listening for his responses, and things are going well. And then all of a sudden, he starts asking me questions about my name, because it was his job, right, to poke holes in me. So he goes, "What's your name again?" I said, "It's Chip." He goes, "Chip? Kind of a name is Chip? That sounds like dip. What about chipmunk? People ever call you that?" And he went down this line, right? And this has been, again, days of doing this kind of work, right? In role plays and intense training and lack of sleep. And I'm making up excuses for myself, right? You hear that. And all of a sudden, I knew it. I felt it. But an edge came over my voice, right? Because he had moved off that topic of my name, but it was still there. And I could hear the people that were with him, who were also hostage takers in the role play, laughing in the background. And that got to me for some reason. It just got to me, Remy. So an edge came over my voice. I knew it was there. And he was asking, like, he said, "I want 49 pizzas." And he started listening out. And I'm saying, "Okay, tell me about these pizzas. What do you want on these pizzas?" Right? I just went very, very, very kind of sterile, but passable. And then we took a break. And the instructor, who was my evaluator, great guy, first name is Mike. Mike comes over my shoulder And he said, "What are you trying to do here?" I said, "Sir?" He said, are you trying to negotiate this person? Are you trying to de-escalate the situation? Or are you trying to sound like you're right? Oh, right. Those were hard words to hear. Because what he was telling me is, you want to sound like you're right. You want to be defensive here, and that's the wrong posture. He was telling me that in shorthand. I knew exactly what he meant. So I had to shake all that off, right? I had to shake off bad performance. I had to shake off that I was already heightened and get back into the game, right? So there are things that's a great question, Remy. There are things about each of us that are triggers for us. The more we're in touch with what those things are, the more we're able to know that, all right, I know that person coming at me now, Uncle Dave or whatever, he's going to start in on me on this. It's a trigger for me. What do you do for that? Well, you prepare yourself. You know he's going to do that. So work around that conversation. Don't allow, like for me, don't become sterile. Don't be defensive. But rather, if you can, laugh it off and move on to something else. Or, talk about foundational things with them, right? So these are the things, is that if you're aware of your triggers, you can absolutely train yourself through them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, Chip, what are other mistakes that people usually, or traps that they fall into while trying to sound convincing or be persuasive in business and beyond?
I think another thing is that I always look for where a person is anchoring. For like people in sales, they have if you're buying and selling a house, there's an anchor price, right? That they always try to get to. One of the ways that Adele and I talk about this is that you should be anchoring on higher principles, on higher things. So not necessarily the give and take of a price or whatever the heart of the deal is, but rather anchor on something that is more powerful, more profound than that. So for example, many people, when they go into negotiations, are fixated on price. We know that, or whatever that deal is supposed to equal out after the outcome. If I'm successful in my negotiation, I'll have this contract signed, or I'll have this amount of money coming to us, or the terms will be favorable in this way. So it's a very binary thing almost. We set ourselves up for that, or our supervisors set ourselves up for that. What we should be doing is we should be looking for, where is the creativity that I can explore within this deal? And that's one of the powerful things about negotiations that I learned at Quantico was that the people that excelled at this were people that were able, one, to be in control as much as they could of their emotions, and to look for that creativity, that difference. So, for example, let's say the person wants, your number is 1.6 million, and they're only offering 850,000. Okay, we have a big delta there. What do I do with that? Well, what we do is, there might be other things within that company, within the deal itself, that you can pull out and extract from, or barter with, that will somehow compensate for the difference that you're lacking. It might be, hey, I understand, you're only, you can only go up to 850. If that's a real number for you, I have to honor that. Where else can we extract value for my team? Maybe there's other marketing you can do that would be much more advantageous for us than the additional monies that you could throw at us. Or maybe there's deliverables that you can adjust on the schedule that would be also helpful. There's more creativity. The other part is, when we say anchor for the higher things, is that if we think about people, like say, that are world leaders. So we know right now we have, Israel and we have a lot of conflict in the world. Well, one of the things that world leaders do, take, for example, in the United States, when the president has meetings over at Camp David, and we know this from history books, that, when world leaders come together and they come together there, one of the ways that they use to shift and convince another leader to move toward a direction that they want them to is to talk about a world that their grandchildren will see. It's been so effective, is that when they start meeting and they start to see each other as real people that have real problems, that have, they're both struggling with different things, and they both have children or grandchildren or family members. What kind of future do we want for them? And so what that person is doing is that they're anchoring on the highest things, right? The very foundations of our world. What are the concepts that we should be concerned about? We know that this conflict is going to end. It needs to end. It's not in the best interest of anyone. And what is it that we want to build afterward? There's the creativity, right? And you give that power over to another person and say, I can't do this on my own. So you are again asking for collaboration. It's not, this is the way it has to be. We're the power here. You have to fall in line. Does that ever work? Never. Right? So anchoring on higher principles, and always look for the creative aspect in a deal.
Anchoring on the higher principles, and always looking for the creative aspects of an agreement. That's an awesome recommendation. Thank you, Chip, for that. Before we move on to my last question for today, which is always the same for all my guests, is going to be on great negotiators. My current project, one of my current projects that I've been working on for a couple of years on. Let us remind our audience, our viewers and listeners, that you guys wrote a book about convincing. It's called Convince Me. Yes, it's called Convince Me, and it has a subtitle which is High Stakes Negotiation Tactics to Get Results in Any Business Situation. Yes, written, co-authored by Chip and Adele. And you guys also have a masterclass. Tell us a little bit more about it, Chip.
Right. So we're doing a training on crisis communications that involves, various aspects that I think your audience would be interested in. There's a lot of counterintuitive points about crisis communications that people can sometimes miss or not aware of entirely. And so we present this in a webinar format, so that it gives people a taste for what more there is to this. And if anyone has an interest in that, I know that we're going to be offering this. I believe it's December 27th. So we'll give you Remy a link to that. But yeah, so we're very excited about that. That's a huge part of our company. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Chip. So guys, if you're interested in the art and science of persuasion, especially in the context of crisis communication, it's Friday, December 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Only 100 spots, limited access webinar. If you're interested, we're going to share a link in the comments. So it's time for our last question. Chip, are you ready?
I'm ready.
So when you think about greatness in negotiation, yes, who comes to your mind? Contemporary, historical, free choice.
Yeah, and I have to say my father. And the reason I say that, my father was a farmer truck driver, right? He had a combination of things, but my father was somebody that truly cared about the people around him. And I still remember that my father was he's a very hard worker. And I worked on the farm with him, my brother and sister, we all worked. And he had this fantastic work ethic, and he just went, nonstop all day. But when somebody came around, he'd stop. And that was kind of the culture, in rural where I grew up in Delaware, where people would just come by to visit. It would be another farmer or another person down the street, or we have very large Amish community. They would come through, and my father would stop everything, no matter what he was doing, and he would talk to that person. And we could be in the middle of, harvesting. We could be setting up equipment to head out, or get ready for the milking or whatever it was. But my father was there. He was fully present, and it didn't matter who the person was. If they came and they wanted to talk to Jim Massey, well, he talked to them, and he stayed and talked as long as they wanted to. And I remember how when he would phrase his words and the things he would say, he always made that person feel better about themselves and about their condition, and made them feel important. And that really struck me as I reflected on that, is that, really that's negotiations. You said earlier, Remy, is that it's understanding people. And that is a key tenet, is making the other person feel respected and seen and important. And if you can do that, you will have a friend for life in that other person.
Jim must have been an amazing person, and who knows, maybe he was also trained in Quantico. You never knew, right? I mean,
he was not. He wasn't around when he was coming up. So,
all right. So he was a natural talent. Let us agree on that. Chip, thank you so much for joining us today. It was absolutely amazing to listen to you, to listen to your take on persuasion techniques, art and science, theory and practice. Thank you for all your recommendations. And guys, thank you for listening to us. Thank you for watching. Until the next time on the podcast on negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Remy.